My mother is addicted to the ghost hunters. She is a slave to a nightly ritual involving sweatpants, a cigarette, and a glass of wine, and then rapt viewing of back-to-back episodes of the Sci-Fi Channel's hit show. For years, I couldn't bear to be in the same room with her during this time block, not even within earshot of her television. And even if I could, I would have been exiled for groaning with disgust too loudly. Exhibit A, my mother. Now, I'm not usually a television snob. In fact, I actually think that the concept of ghost hunters is quite brilliant. If scientific evidence could actually be found proving the persistence of a soul after the death of its body, even if that soul was locked in a perpetual cycle of torture in some hotel boiler room, well, that would be the most significant discovery in the history of humanity. Everything about our lives and how we live them would change. So what infuriates me about the ghost hunters is who they found to conduct the research. They found a collection of chronically inept bumblefucks and crazy cat ladies who no sane individual would allow to operate their stove without supervision. Exhibit B, the chucklefucks in question. Now, I feel like it's almost as though the producers of this show are cruelly mocking both their stars and us, their audience. It's like if NASA had chosen a drunken college frisbee golf team to colonize the moon just to get their yayas off. And I point this out to my mom, and she laughs with me in agreement. But any given night of the week, I can find her on her couch, watching the fools as they stumble through an exploration of something that they can never appreciate. Now, the fascination for my mom's addiction comes from knowing who this woman is and knowing how out of character this is for her. My father, her father, an agnostic and a devout scientist. Exhibit C now, my grandfather. This is the man who, when I came to him at 7 years old and asked, "What happens when we die?" he could only offer me one sentence of consolation and good faith. And I quote, "Well, buddy, you can't destroy energy. It only changes form. So if you ask to be buried at sea and you're really lucky, maybe you'll get to come back as a fish." This is my family. We were never a superstitious clan. But none of us had ever died yet either. So when this finally came to pass with my grandmother, our matriarch no less, we were surprisingly devastated that nothing out of the ordinary or the divine struck us. We were with her in the room when she passed, and then she was gone, and we just remained behind, inconsolable. Exhibit D, 3 generations of lost men. Now, just moments after she passed, a short, fat woman wearing a little name tag that announced her as a chaplain, a role that apparently anyone can play as long as they have a cheesy sweater and no trace of shame. This woman waddles into my grandmother's room, and she makes a fatal mistake. She walks up to my vacant-eyed mother in the process of grieving. She puts a hand on her shoulder, and nodding at her own words this entire time, she says, "I know your mother wasn't religious, but she believed at the very end." And my mother takes one step forward on instinct, cornering this little salesman against the wall. "You listen to me now," she begins. "My mother was a saint. And if your God is so up his own ass that it makes a difference to him whether she believes in him or not, then I have something to tell your God. Do you want to know what it is?" "No." The chaplain whimpers in reply. "No," my mother says, "I know you don't." Adding insult to injury, the chaplain was lying to us at this moment. My grandmother had been afraid of death her entire life, and it persisted even into her final moments. I know this because she told me so. My grandfather had spent World War II in the Navy as a radio man. He listened for Japanese voices floating in a cramped tin shack somewhere out in the Pacific the entire time. And when she died, he wanted to be home at home alone where he spent hours fiddling with this ancient radio, hovering over an AM station that was broadcasting black hymnals, restlessly tuning the dial as though he were searching for some signal that would bring him word of what had become of his wife of 60 years. And meanwhile, my mother and I, we sat in our backyard, drinking and smoking the cigarettes she would eventually become addicted to, never fully regaining control of ourselves. I want to believe that she's out there somewhere, my mother said, but I just can't. She remained in a deep depression for months. I don't ever want to get over this. She was my mother said. How do you ever let someone like that go? And this was when her obsession with the ghost hunters began, and shortly after that, the hauntings. I had returned to my job in New York, in my apartment in Brooklyn. My mother had never seen this, and she was curious, so I emailed her a reverse handheld shot of myself sitting at my desk, and I received a cell phone from her just minutes later. "Do you see it?" she asked. "Do I see what?" I said. "Do you see the face? It's looking at you. Its head is hovering right over your shoulder. It's looking at the camera. It's clear as day. Exhibit E, the photo in question." Do you see it? Neither did I. I didn't see this, nor did I see the horseman and carriage that she found after magnifying it by 200% in Photoshop shortly after. But she remained convinced. Even more so after she researched my neighborhood and found that my building was originally built by a Civil War surgeon who had operated on his patients in our living room. And not long after this passed, then the dreams came. One night my mother called me to tell me she'd had a dream of my grandmother, now younger and restored to health. And as in life, my grandmother wasted no words in getting her point across. "Listen," she said, "you've had your time carrying on and crying your little ass off. But now you need to get on with things. I'm fine." And when my mom told me this, I chalked it up, and all of the dreams to come, up to the healing instincts of a mourner's mind. And I just left it at that. But then one day, my grandmother visited me. And 2 years had passed. I was serving overseas in a desert where I found myself very sick and very bedridden, sweating and shitting myself towards a dangerous proximity with death. And as I lay under this mosquito net you see before you, and I waited for my bug to pass, I hallucinated profoundly. I hallucinated that I was young again, and that the little breeze that was managing to come through my window was actually blowing through my grandmother's house. And it was her that was sitting by my bed and stroking my hair. Exhibit F, better times. And after this encounter, I saw ghosts everywhere. I saw the ghost my grandfather had become, alive as a widower in a world he no longer cared to understand, content to wait for the date that will complete the plaque he already shares with his wife. I was a ghost of the child my mother had raised, replaced now by a Newfoundland Labrador so that she'd have something to take care of because I no longer needed it. And then I saw the future. One day, my own mother will die, and I'm sure that I will dream of her. And after her time, my time will come. And if I live my life right, someone will let me haunt them. And I can't pretend that that thought is not a comforting one. This is how I became a convert to my mother's obsession. Not because this show suddenly makes sense to me, but because I saw that those chuckleheads and cat ladies fumbling with the eternal on TV have something in common with me. We have a solidarity now. That solidarity is that we are alive. And until someone more professional than the ghost hunters comes around to pick up this investigation, there's only one certainty for us. The longer we live, the more there's going to be for us to be haunted by. Thank you. You are the blood flowing through my fingers.